This is Sam.
This is Rebecca.
This is Mackenzie.
And this is Southpaw.
Hey, and one more thing. If you love the show and want to support us, go to patreon.com/southpawpod. Today on Southpaw, we have Rebecca and Mackenzie from the Warrior Sisters. So let's first start by explaining what is Warrior Sisters.
So Warrior Sisters is a nonprofit that was started about 5 years ago. Our mission is to bring self-defense training free and accessibly to as many women as possible.
So what is the origin story behind Warrior Sisters? So that's what it's about, but how did it start and why did it start?
So Warrior Sisters was started out of a crisis that was happening on the U of O campus, where there were a number of sexual assaults that were taking place. And most of the responses that we were seeing were reactionary. How do we deal with self-care afterwards? Things along those lines. However, we wanted to do a direct action campaign that was actually going to address this issue in a way that would attack it at its roots. So that is kind of the origin story of where we started.
And so it started out from U of O or a college campus. Is it still mostly a college campus thing?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. So it actually never took place on the U of O college campus. This was just a reaction of women in the community who recognized a need that was basically to offer protections for women in an empowered basis. So how could we support women across the city of Eugene? Our first training started at the Eugene Mission, actually, where we were providing free trainings for the homeless population that we have in Eugene, and then moving into a school, later to the Peterson Barn, then the Boreal, and then finally partnering with different martial arts places so that we could have a space in an actual gym.
I'm sure there are many aspects to running an organization like this one. So did the founding members have experience in running a nonprofit before or a martial arts program?
The founding members had not worked with martial arts prior to this or with nonprofits directly in the sense of starting a nonprofit up. So this was a brand new endeavor.
So were there challenges to that, especially like forming a nonprofit?
So absolutely there were challenges in the sense of we realized that we needed to find resources in our community to help build up our tools. However, starting a nonprofit was probably the easiest part of the beginnings of Warrior Sisters. The paperwork doesn't actually take as much time as you'd think.
Oh, okay. So what was the process of getting word out and getting participants and volunteers?
So in the beginning, it was really just two women who had decided that they needed to get trained. So they went to the martial arts community in Eugene and were given some support from various martial artists and provided them with some curriculum. And in that sense, that's how kind of that began. Through that network, that's where we were able to find volunteers. But initially, volunteers and trainers developed out of people who were just participants. So once those two women, our founders, started the actual trainings, more and more women were coming and more women were inspired to join our organization.
And that's basically still kind of how it happens, that's how I ended up getting more seriously involved with Warrior Sisters. They offered a training. I got hooked. I wanted in. Tell me how I could possibly help. I started doing things that don't really require a lot of training, like tabling or doing flyer outreach. And then I sort of slowly work my way into getting a little bit more training with our training collective and being able to assist in the trainings themselves.
But was there interest right away?
I would say there was definitely interest in the sense that there was a real need where women wanted community that was going to make them feel empowered in the face of this crisis that was going on campus. There was a need to have a community to discuss the experience of feeling unsafe, but to do that in a way that was going to make people feel powerful instead of making them feel scared.
So you mentioned martial arts schools and how there was some initial support, but were they all supportive from the beginning, or was there any backlash?
There was no backlash, and thus far we've only been supported by the various martial arts schools in our community. We've been offered free spaces for training. We've been offered support through their trainers to provide our organization with some internal training as well. We've been supported all around by the different martial arts organizations in this community.
So you kind of got into the mission of Warrior Sisters, but beyond that, is there a bigger thesis, or is there a philosophy or principles you all abide by?
Definitely.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, what makes Warrior Sisters really different is that it is an empowerment based self defense class. And we really bring that into everything that we do. Um, and not just that, but that also we try to be as respectful of where each individual is coming from, not just trying to be as trauma informed as possible, but as diversity recognizing as possible, be that in person's ability or their background or their various intersecting ways that violence is brought into their lives, which is something that made Warrior Sisters so different for me when I showed up, and really made it feel like a welcoming community.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Mackenzie's just said. I would also add in the fact that when we talk about self defense, we're talking about it on an escalation model as well, which is that we don't need to just defend ourselves in physical altercations, but we can also learn to defend ourselves and defend our boundaries by practicing different verbal skills as well. So, yeah, absolutely. Being able to stand up for our boundaries is the base of self defense and building that confidence.
Yeah, we really talk about, workplace, sort of horizontal violence, how to break down those difficult conversations around setting boundaries. We talk about that in our self-defense classes, and those are really skills that people practice every single day. I mean, people aren't going to have to physically defend themselves very often in their lives, hopefully, but people use those boundary setting skills and those empowerment skills every single day, and they tell us that in our trainings.
You just said something horizontal. What was that?
Horizontal violence, like the principle of like maybe someone who's on your same peer level or in your same like power, like say you're in a workplace and you having a coworker who is kind of trying to like do something that would be detrimental to your like job status or something. So sometimes that can be just peer on peer violence. It's sort of supporting a larger structure of oppression within a community or workspace or something like that.
The one other thing that I would add is that our philosophy is based on the idea that all women, all people can learn how to defend themselves, and that regardless of your background or ability, anybody is going to be able to take tools from our trainings and apply them to their own lives in unique ways. So everybody is capable.
And something else you said, trauma informed. So what do you mean by that?
Trauma informed practices are something that are starting to get a lot more voice in various different communities. So trauma informed care is in healthcare, but being trauma informed in self defense is sort of a recognition that every single person who walks in with a story. They walk in with a history of various levels or various forms of trauma, and that those things come up in different ways for everybody, and being like knowing that as a story, so being careful in the assumptions that we make about people, and being compassionate when those things come up, and finding ways to make self-defense accessible for people who have a history of violence, who have a history of whatever it is that comes in, that can present itself in as many different ways as there are people. But that is sort of a central tenet, that we allow people to, we believe people when they say to us, I need to do that in a different way because of whatever. And we help them negotiate how that's going to look for their body and for their person.
The one other element I would add to trauma-informed care, which Mackenzie just so beautifully described, is that when we're looking at a past that possibly includes a traumatic history, that we also take into account that we have strengths that come out of our past, even when they're horrible events that have knocked us down, it builds us up and makes us stronger in the end, a lot of the time. So being able to see people not just as a deficit, but being able to see them as a strength as well.
Has Warrior Sisters noticed that a lot of the participants who do come in have never trained anywhere else prior?
That is absolutely the case that we tend to see, is that the majority of people and participants who come to our trainings haven't had either funds or time to schedule trainings. So this is often their first time being able to access self-defense classes. So again, most of our participants, based off of surveys that we've taken, have suggested that they would not be able to afford a self-defense class, or they wouldn't be able to make a long-term commitment. So our trainings are always drop-in, and there's no sign-up that's going to have to happen ahead of time. And that basically makes it more compatible to our community schedules.
From the martial arts world, I came up in the martial arts, and we usually call people students, right? But I noticed with you all, you say participants. Is that an overarching philosophy?
Absolutely. I mean, the full title of our organization is Warrior Sisters Collective. And that is a foundational principle for us, is that we're building a community that is built off of resilience and strength and accessibility as well. So to say students implies oftentimes a hierarchy, and we really wanted to create a horizontal structure that was going to create space and platforms for all the voices. So yeah, that's why we use that language.
Yeah, I think it also really also lends to the philosophy that we take in our training, that is really about retraining them to think of themselves as powerful, right? They're not there to be the student and to listen to us and to look at us as the ultimate authority on things. We want them to move out of that each and every training, whether they come once or whether they come for our entire series, walking out, seeing themselves as an authority in their defense and in their empowerment.
Now, besides just the cost, did you all also find there was something lacking in pre-existing self-defense programs and curricula, or was the problem in self-defense a general lack of curriculum and evidence-based research?
I would say more of the former, that a lot of the self-defense classes that we had experienced revolved around, especially when talking to women, about hiding behind your boyfriend or walk in a group. And there was a lot of undertones of victim blaming that we were experiencing in the initial self-defense classes that our trainers had gone to. And we wanted to, again, transition out of that. So having a targeted focus on how we can empower women rather than tell them that by themselves they're always going to be at risk was something that we were looking for in our curriculum.
So how did you all create the curriculum and also figure out what order to teach?
So our curriculum developed initially on the verbal side from experience that the trainers had in the community. So we had trainers that were coming from working at Whitebird, which is a trauma-informed clinic in the Eugene area. That's really wonderful. And so from there, we learned a lot about de-escalation techniques. We also had trainers that were coming from working in the nonprofit world, again, with trauma-informed care. So bringing trauma-informed care practices into our community. And then some other trainers that were previously involved in the empowerment self-defense movement back in the, I think, 70s, I want to say, contributed a lot to that curriculum as well for the verbal side of our trainings. And then for the physical, we based most of it off of the Krav Maga training that we were getting, and then adapted it to the simplest and most practical skill sets for women.
And so when we're thinking about having a mixed bag of more experience versus first timers in our group, we pretty much always include at some stage, the very, very basics of, what is a cross, what is a jab, like what is our stance, and every single training. And then we will provide sort of individualized attention to people, people who we know are a little bit more advanced. We will give a range of both abilities for like the range of abilities that are in our class, but also for experience levels. So, if we're doing like a certain skill set, we'll say, if you're more advanced, you might do this faster, or you might add in this extra thing. If you want to go slower, or this is your first time here, just stick with getting this form done. So, it's less complicated than it sounds like. I feel like as long as you're willing to give that individualized attention to people.
Right. So we always have our curriculum is always going to embrace slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so we'll always go back to those basics, and everybody needs practice and care around that. So in that sense, whether you're advanced or if you're a beginner, everyone's going to be practicing a jab cross, a snap kick, and a knee at some point in a training.
How often is the curriculum updated?
We have been through several varieties of our curriculum, depending on the types of training that we're offering. And I would say that we are rethinking them on a yearly basis. We consider, do we need to make an adjustment or not? Or basically, depending on the type of training that we're offering, how should we adjust it to that community that we're going to?
The reason why I ask is also, having grown up in martial arts, I have seen a lot of places where they never update the curriculum. Even whether it works, it doesn't work, they don't care. It's always going to be the same curriculum. So just the fact that you all think about it and do regularly update your curriculum, that says a lot right there.
Yeah, we're constantly engaging in ongoing training for our trainers. For instance, just a couple weeks ago, we had a guest trainer come down from a gym in Corvallis, and based off of her feedback, we're updating all of our ground survival techniques.
And we're also always collecting feedback from our participants as well, and which is something that we really take seriously and always try to integrate their feedback.
Absolutely.
This has already been touched upon, but I want to expand on this about the misconceptions people might have or the priority of things that need to be taught. For instance, de-escalation or using verbal self-defense. So what are some other practical concepts, or even with those concepts, can you elaborate on them? But things that people don't normally think about or have stereotypes about self-defense, and they think it involves this, this, and this. But in real life, it involves other things that people might not consider.
I guess what that brings up for me, and tell me if this hits on your question, but I think we spend a lot of time just trying to get our participants to a place where they believe their own own gut reaction, right? We talk a lot about when you're in a stressful situation where you might need to engage in a de-escalation technique, like our first reaction is to kind of say, like, is this really happening? Is it? But maybe I'm misunderstanding what's going on, and how, like, that critical reasoning that happens is important. And also that we have to get our participants to a place where they can say, like, I'm going to assess the situation, and then I'm going to believe myself that I feel like I'm in danger right now, and then how to move into those techniques. I feel like that's sort of the first barrier that we have to overcome. And we spend a lot of time talking about it, or kind of going through little exercises around what does that feel like in your body, and what does that feel like in your mind, recognizing those very first red flags that happen that can cue someone in to being in a dangerous situation.
Yeah, trusting your gut is definitely a huge part of what we're doing in our trainings.
So how important then is listening to the participants and hearing how they're feeling, their stories?
So important. I mean, so important. Whether or not we're using language that can help people understand what we're trying to tell them, whether or not we're using language that makes people feel empowered when we're talking about those sensitive topics, those are all things that really require a conversation with each population that we move into, whether we're doing a training for like a workplace, or whether we're doing a training just with in a new area of the community. Each sort of subset of the community has its own kind of culture, so always trying to interact with that on a really open and communicative level is really important.
Something that I'd like to add is that with Warrior Sisters, we're not a martial art. And that seems to be like a heavy misconception that's taking place sometimes with participants, as they come in thinking that they need to be training all the time. They need to be a particular body type, that there is a right answer when you're in a stressful situation. By not being a martial art, we're not saying that we have an exact prescription for you. We're saying that we have tools that you can use to your ability and to whatever your comfort level is. So that also includes the verbal part of our self-defense. which is in awareness and in taking up space with your voice. So if you are able to recognize when people are manipulating you to get a desired behavior out of you, then you can then better assert your boundaries.
And I think allowing people just a safe space to sort of analyze their own strengths. Like when I came to Warrior Sisters, I found out that I pack a mean elbow. Like I pack a mean elbow. So just like getting people the experience just to see what they are good at, what their body is already good at doing, gives them just that base level of muscle memory that they can, like, they know that they can do that, or that like that's a reaction that they may have if they're in a stressful situation.
Exactly. That any of these tools can be used by anybody. That's the number one thing, is that self-defense is accessible to everybody, and that you don't need to be perfect and you don't need to be what you envision on a martial arts poster to be able to defend yourself.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed myself, is that martial arts comes with some baggage and expectations that can be disempowering and often even delay people's progress, because they have this idea of how it should be. And sometimes you just say, forget about your idea of what martial arts should look like and just do what you can do.
Yeah, I mean, so something that we see sometimes is that with a martial art, it involves a heavy commitment to not just practicing a skill set, but also oftentimes to a particular mentality. And a lot of the women that come to our trainings are looking for a way that they can defend themselves in their lives without taking on additional commitments or additional responsibilities. They're looking for a tool that's going to fit into their world as their world is. And that's what we hope to provide.
Did Warrior Sisters come to that understanding from the get-go?
That's a great question. I think it came pretty initially because we've tried from the get-go to avoid saying martial art, because of the distinction that we are not projecting a type of philosophy necessarily, or a type of recipe for successful use of the tools that we're providing for our participants. So the only philosophy that we're trying to get across is that you can do it, is that empowerment basis. And the tools that we are showcasing, whichever way they come out, is going to be the correct way for that situation, for that participant, for that woman. So we've steered away from that terminology from the beginning, although always said that we have pulled all of our tools, all of our physical and verbal skills from the martial arts community.
So what are some facts about real life self-defense scenarios for women that people might not be aware of, but probably should be aware of?
I think just the fact that self-defense does actually help prevent violence towards women in particular is sometimes a myth that we have to bust, that it does actually work. Even the women who sometimes show up to trainings, they're like, right, but am I actually going to be able to do it in the moment? And we do have some research that has come out actually through our very own U of O has a really amazing a researcher there who has come out with a really great set of statistics around like, does this actually help prevent violence or sexual violence? And the answer is yes. And that's I mean, not every single time, and we talk about that, but that it can be a really useful tool, even if you aren't a quote unquote martial artist.
Yeah, I'd love to add on to that a little bit as well, which is that the thing that people often don't realize when it comes to women's self-defense and the need for it is how we have to use these tools on a daily basis in our lives. The number one thing that we hear from our participants is how they use the verbal tools that we provide and that we practice in that space on a regular basis. So how do I recognize when someone is trying to change my behavior, acknowledging what those red flags are, being able to lay a strong boundary, being able to de-escalate a situation before it gets to the point of physical violence. All of these tools are things that we have to think about on a daily basis as women in our lives. And so being able to practice them in a safe community and supportive community as well is extremely important.
A lot of people think about self-defense like there's a mugger or some stranger that might attack me. And even for self-defense that's specific for women, I've seen it taught in that way. But when you say daily, then you're talking about people you know, people in your life. And I think that's another important part that maybe because you two are training in it all the time that you're very well aware of. But for a lot of people, they don't think about self-defense in that way. They think of the other, they think of strangers, when it's actually probably more common that it'll be, like you said, horizontal violence, maybe somebody you know or somebody in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about self-defense, what we're looking at is we're looking at a power struggle that's essentially taking place. And when we think about how people assert power over one another in a daily exchange, that's when we start to see some of the issues that we're talking about. So, for example, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where somebody at a workplace, this is a common example that we have, but starts to put their arm on top of your head, and they're trying to be casual about it, but in reality what they're doing is they're trying to take up space from your bubble, or maybe they're trying to assert dominance over you in that situation. And so being able to say, hey, when you put your arm on top of my head, it makes me feel like you're taking up my space and I need you to step back. Being able to assert a daily boundary like that allows us to have one more voice in our daily circles and lives, so in work and relationships, but it also allows us to be able to take up that, again, reclaim our space as we walk through the world.
Yeah, we spend whole exercises just practicing saying no in like as many different situations and ways and tones as we possibly can. So your boss asks you to stay late at work again, and we practice saying no, and then we unpack the various different reasons why you might not be able to or why you might not feel safe, and just practice like scripts around various ways to apply the no in various situations.
Exactly. We find so often that as women, like we've been socialized in a way to be accommodating, to put our needs below the needs of others around us. And so just practicing what it's like to put yourself first is a foundational principle of the self-defense training that we offer.
And this was mentioned previously about trusting your gut, but do you do any training specifically on leaving abusive situations, whether they be workplace or personal, or when to recognize a situation that is becoming toxic or dangerous? So some telltale signs.
I would say that is certainly that is at least a subject that we touch on in most of our trainings, especially the verbal trainings. When to recognize red flags, what red flags can look like, and then how to keep yourself safe in those situations. And a big part of that, I think, is presenting that class in a group, a safe community space, or reminding people and women that they have community resources, and that we're there, and that they can always reach out to people around them to keep themselves safe, and that if they do find themselves in that situation.
Yeah, to tack onto that, basically, while we're not specifically saying how do you leave an abusive relationship, we're definitely doing trainings on how to identify when your rights are being abused. So we do, and a lot of that is just based in understanding, again, and having awareness about what we have the right to. So one of our exercises is based off of that, where we will just go around and say, what is the right that we feel like we have today that we're going to use to channel our training? And that will be sometimes simple as, I have the right to say no. I have the right to feel beautiful. I have the right to take up space, to change my mind. And the things that people say when they're in these, given that opportunity to declare how they feel like they deserve to be treated, is super empowering. And sometimes it just takes hearing that and verbalizing that to recognize that you need to get out of a situation. And then again, that's when we often lean back on our community and show that we have a support system here that is willing to help you with whatever is necessary.
Are there some examples of what might be red flags? I know it's idiosyncratic to the situation and you all are covering like the core concepts, but let's say just the basic generic ones that can happen often, that we just, because it happens so often, maybe we ignore or don't think it's a big deal until it becomes a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So specific red flags are always, there's a whole laundry list, obviously, of what we could get into. But examples could be not having someone respect your right to privacy, and intruding into your personal space on a regular basis. So that could look a variety of different ways, and recognizing that is really difficult. So one thing that we will do is practice scenarios. We'll read a scenario out, and then women will choose whether they, like, on a scale of the most healthy relationship in the world to the most unhealthy relationship in the world, they'll move across the room and we'll discuss why we feel different ways. And that's part of what we are talking about here, is that everyone's experience exists on a spectrum. So again, like, what could be a very strong red flag to somebody might not have been thought of before. And so we need to discuss that with the community and see, like, is this actually a problem that I wasn't paying attention to? Or is this something that I'm more okay with because of my personal boundaries? It's pretty extensive.
I think another one that we practice a lot is recognizing when people are continually not hearing your no, right? So they're asking in a way that is trying to either be coercive or trying to convince you to agree with what they're doing, and they're not hearing your no matter how many times you say it. So we practiced recognizing that both as a red flag, and then sort of particular strategies for communication around that, which is kind of something that we call the broken record sometimes, where you just stick to your guns and say, no, I can't do that. No, I can't do that. Or like, no, I won't do that. No, I won't do that. And recognizing that as an abusive behavior and disengaging with it either as a relationship or as a communication.
So I'll just jump in real quickly with the concept of red flags again. So what I was saying before is essentially that a red flag to somebody might be a yellow flag to somebody else, or might not be a flag at all. But what we can do is look at the foundation of a red flag and break it down into ploys. And those ploys we can get a little bit more specific about. So how are people pushing our boundaries? So ploys that involve making you feel guilty, or flattery, even being overly flirtatious to try to make you feel a certain way so that you will change your mind, or persistence, which is what Mackenzie was referencing just then. Or it could be you owe me for this situation and now you have to do this for me. But recognizing ploys is the foundation of a red flag.
So whether it's a yellow flag or a red flag, how does it feel? What should we be honing in on within our body?
It's going to feel different for every single woman. But the example that I use is that oftentimes it comes with reflection. So if you've ever been up late at night, you're trying to fall asleep and you can't because you just thought of the perfect retort to a comment that someone made to you earlier in the day that you weren't able to say prior. That's my example of, oh, my gut was telling me something, but I couldn't put my finger on it at that moment. So a lot of this is going to involve reflection, and you have to think about, what does it feel like for me when I'm uncomfortable, and create space for that, because you don't have to have the ability to label why you're uncomfortable. You just need to know when you're feeling that way. And that's going to feel different for different people. It could be that your brain is not putting together cohesive sentences all of a sudden. It could be that you feel shaky. It could be that you're hyper aware in a situation. It's all going to look different and feel different depending on who you are and what your past experience is.
Now, even within the name Warrior Sisters, the term collective is a part of it, and something you two have mentioned frequently in our talk is community. So why is collective support group community so important, especially when it comes to safety?
I think if we look back onto the history of different social movements throughout time, essentially, what we see is that they come from people working together. It doesn't come from one single voice. It takes a movement to make change happen. And that is the foundation of what we are trying to do. We're not just trying to say that every woman as an individual deserves to be protected. That's true, but we want to change our culture. We want to change our society. And to do that, we have to band together and show support and push through the really difficult times that we're going to be facing in the process of doing that. So having that community ensures that we are not just an individual, we're a movement.
This was mentioned before, but community creates resources you can lean on. But on top of that, does it create emotional and psychological protection as well for the members because there's others in it?
Well, absolutely. I think that having that support system around you, not only of people that you know you can lean on for more resources, but to make you feel better about your progress and your growth, makes people feel like they can commit to themselves in this way, that they can commit to acknowledging something that's very scary in their life and creating space to do that in a way that's going to make them stronger in the face of that fear. So I know that's how I started with Warrior Sisters. When I first came to trainings, I felt very uncomfortable with a lot of the skill sets. For a first timer, the first time you throw a punch, your arms feel like spaghetti. It doesn't feel good. But having a support of women around you who are saying, "Oh, don't worry, I've been there. You're doing so good. Just keep it up," is going to help me feel like empowered in that space.
And something else that we talk about a lot is in our classes is bystander intervention, and what that looks like and what the techniques are. So someone who is not the person who's directly being attacked, having skills to be able to distract or intervene in a situation that's putting someone else in danger. And I think that that really feeds into our sense of community. You know, they see other people here gaining skills, not just to stand alone and defend themselves, but to defend other people in their community so that they know walking out of that class, not just that they have self defense skills, but that other people have intervention skills so that if they're walking on the street, other people in their community have skills that are going to help protect them as well. And I think that's a really powerful message.
That actually also kind of goes back to some of our origins as well, which before we started offering regular trainings, one of the intentions was to form essentially a coalition of trained women who could go out and walk the streets and protect other women as they were, moving about the world. And so the end game has always been, how do we support the women in our community? It was never about an individual. Although we do, of course, offer sorry, that just sounds really bad. All of a sudden, I'm like, it is about the individual and an individual's needs, but it's also about supporting our community as a whole.
Now, you two might have already answered some of this, but what are some common questions newcomers to your classes might ask?
Does this really work?
Am I doing this right? Is it supposed to feel this awkward?
Yeah, a lot of times it's just women thinking like they don't have the ability to take on a really strong man or attacker. And so there's a lot of hesitancy in that. But we show them over and over, like, it works.
So the questions themselves that they might ask also reveals then maybe the cultural conditioning that they went through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And when we think about how our culture talks about women, so often it's that you're weak or you don't stand a chance against someone stronger than you. And what we're trying to show is there are variations in strength, and there are ways to manipulate those conditions to our favor.
Yeah, and I think a lot, even aside from the verbal questions we get a lot of just sort of like questioning behavior, right? Almost everybody, the first time that they like really throw a punch on the punching bag, they like stop and they kind of look at you like, is that okay? Like, I just hit that really hard. Like, oh my gosh, and they giggle and they kind of like laugh and then they do it a little bit more and they stop and they look around like other people are also doing this. This is okay for me to be, saying something that's really forceful and really aggressive, as a woman is always like a little bit of a stumble step to get them started. And then when they see this group of powerful other women just showing up and really practicing these physical skill sets, they slowly start to come into their own sense of physical power.
Absolutely. And that actually reminds me of another question that I hear a lot, which is this okay when working with a partner? So if we're practicing on pads and one person is holding those pads, what I hear so frequently is someone saying, "Are you okay?" Is it okay? Do I need to tone my power back? And there's just this amazing level of consciousness that our participants are showing towards each other in regards to showing strength, and also to making sure that everyone feels comfortable.
Now, you're dealing with possibly some pretty scary scenarios. So, how do you then also create a safe and comfortable environment where people who need this training want to keep showing up?
So we start every single one of our trainings by adding in the caveat of whatever we are doing today, it's up to you according to your comfort level if you want to be participating or how you want to participate. So based off of not only your comfort level, but what you feel for your own body type is good for you, it's going to be up to you how you want to participate. So it does come up frequently where a situation is overwhelming or someone doesn't have the confidence yet to engage. And so oftentimes women just say, okay, we're going to step back and observe right now. And we totally support that. And we don't question that. We believe that women know what's best for themselves.
When I first started this, I couldn't do this because it was a little bit overwhelming for me. We just kind of like normalize it. At the same time, don't make it like a big deal. If someone stops and steps back, we don't like all huddle around them and like make a deal out of it. It's just kind of like part of the norm of our trainings around people having that decision and making that their assessment. Well, we do, of course, like check in with someone. If someone is looking really overwhelmed, we kind of do that in a way that doesn't put a lot of pressure on them.
So it sounds like it's very organized, but at the same time, there isn't a lot of pressure being put on you.
Yeah.
Now, as men, what can we do to be better allies? I know not committing assault is the bare minimum, but is there more we can do?
I would start by saying just believe women. Believe women when they say that they are feeling uncomfortable in a situation and not minimizing that reaction. So often we hear people say, like, you're being too sensitive or you're overreacting. You should just cut that language out of your vocabulary and recognize that when someone feels unsafe or feels uncomfortable, that reality is a reality for these people. And so even though you might not feel that way, somebody else does. And it's time for maybe some reflection about what's occurring in that situation that as an ally, you could step up and interrupt so that those situations don't continue to be created.
Yeah, and I would say have those conversations within your own community of male friends, like without even women being present anywhere around. When you see those behaviors coming up, when you hear that language, when you hear those jokes or whatever, if you feel like you're in a safe space to do that, speak up, because the onus can't always be on the women or women identifying folks in your life to constantly be telling you when you're doing the wrong thing. It's time for the internal community to sort of recognize their behaviors and hold each other accountable.
Now, to add to that, I have a son, and so perhaps a lot of what is needed for men needs to start when they're boys. So what do you wish parents like me would do in the raising of future men?
I would say to allow your son space to learn about his own emotional needs. So self-reflection, learning that skill of being able to reflect on his own behaviors and his own emotional space, and having a safe space to talk about that with another adult man is, I think, part of the cultural shift that is really going to allow our future generations of men the skill set to have emotionally intelligent conversations with the women in their life, and for them to have a skill set to have their own self-reflection and to feel safe in the community of men to talk about their feelings and to have feelings and to be held accountable when they need to be.
Yeah, I think what Mackenzie said is pretty perfect. I don't have children, so I know that.
Neither do I. Full disclosure, I do not have children yet either.
But I will say that I am a high school teacher, so I work with teenage youth. And what I see oftentimes is a lack of what Mackenzie was just suggesting, which is the space to have an emotionally sensitive conversation around boundaries and around healthy communication practices. And so if we can start those off at a younger age, I think we'll start to see those impacts pretty quickly, actually.
Has Warrior Sisters then ever had parents coming to you or messaging Warrior Sisters about advice about raising boys?
Not to my knowledge.
Oh, it's just me.
We haven't had advice about raising boys, but we have had certain trainings where we also bring in the male and male identified folks in our community to talk about bystander intervention and to talk about the varying levels of privilege and oppression that happen within a gendered context and how they can be better allies within the community.
Now, the far right have been emboldened in the past several years. Has your organization gotten requests for training from activists and organizers, or have you had activists and organizers come to your classes?
I would say,
I think like half of us are activists and organizers. Probably more than half.
Yeah, that's a great point. Most of our trainers are involved in the activist world to some varying degree or another. And so we bring our trainings into our outside circles as well. Have we done specific trainings with different activist organizations? Yes and no, in the sense that we've attended conferences, which are the hubs for these activist organizations, and offered trainings there for people to participate in. And we're also currently working to schedule some more of those at the moment.
So maybe not always officially as Warrior Sisters, but as members, when you leave to your organizations, then you will take some of that training with you.
Absolutely.
So along with activists and organizers, what about interests from members of the LGBTQ community? Has that risen, or has that always been a part of Warrior Sisters?
So our organization has always been inclusive in essence, and we're realizing now that we need to be more explicit in that inclusivity and to open our arms in a really broader way. So not just to say that, of course, the LGBTQ community is welcome with our community and is a part of our community, but that there's something we can also learn about our practices to best support our LGBTQ sisters as well. And so we're seeking our own trainings as well to better refine our practices and also to just make sure that they're as accessible as possible. I would say that there is possibly a heightened need due to the nature of the rising right at the moment. And that's something that we're recognizing in refining that practice internally at the moment.
Now, a term both of you have used several times is empowerment, and that's all over the website. It's all over your materials. So how do you all incorporate empowerment into training? Is it just automatically part of it? Is training itself empowering, or is it more than that? Do you have to be more explicit with empowerment in your philosophy? Or is there even a martial version or a self-defense version of feminism?
Ooh, that's such a great question. Is there a feminist version of self-defense? So empowerment isn't just a word, it's not just a concept, but it really is a form of communication, I think, at the roots of it. And so part of that is communicating in a way that creates a sense of trust between participants and trainers, and also in communicating a sense of accessibility. So as we're running our trainings, we're always offering support, but we're also always offering positive feedback as well. And that faith in our participants when they say, this doesn't feel right, or what about this? This works better for me, that we trust them in acknowledging what's going to work for their bodies and acknowledging when they need space or when they want to practice something more intense or advanced. So essentially what we're saying is that the ball is in your court. We're here to provide you with tools. How you want to use them is going to be up to what fits best for your needs. So historically, women haven't been allowed that in self-defense trainings. Women have been told, this is what you need to do. And if you don't, it's not going to work. And we know that's not the case. We know that any little bit that you can pull out is actually going to help, because we know that any amount of resistance is often something that is going to impact the level of violence that you being projected onto you. So having any form of resistance whatsoever is always going to be a strength. And that's something that we like to tell our women.
Is there still an empowering aspect just to physical training itself? Like, have either one of you noticed just somebody doing physical training, whether it's kicking or maybe it's just exercise, and that in itself makes them feel, I know the point is to make you physically more powerful, but have you seen something change in somebody where emotionally, psychologically, you see something brightening up and lighting up?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I think we can both speak on this from personal experience as well, which is that, like, when I started training, particularly, and I see this reflected in a lot of our participants, um, we don't feel great. We feel weird about taking up space or throwing a punch, exerting power in that way. We feel weird about yelling, about making loud noises. And so just to be able to get used to that feeling, it taps into this whole other side of at least me that I didn't realize I had. And that was super powerful for me to realize that I could be loud and that I could show strength and that I could take up space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I came from a background of being a very competitive soccer player, so I was already somebody who felt physically powerful in my space for the most part, and was used to moving my body in powerful ways. In that same sense, just Warrior Sisters was a whole nother level for me, in that there is still some overlying messages around being, when you're working in another athletic space or in any other training capacity, where there is sometimes a little bit of this sense of judgment around being too strong, or like having the possibility of not being conscientious enough of your partner, which is still we see that conscientiousness all the way through our trainings when people are working with their partners. But just watching that little process that I was talking about earlier, where they throw their first punch and it's like kind of awkward on the bag, but they like stop and they look around, and all these other women are like just going at it, and they're like, it's that, like you mentioned, it's a brightening. You see it in their face. They're like, wait, we can do this. Like, I'm going to do it some more. And they hit a little bit, and then they look around and they look at you, and you're like, that is awesome. Go for it. Be your most powerful self. Like, just, hit that bag or whatever. And then they feel this ability to fully step into their powerful embodied space, and just having that freedom in a space that is completely safe for them is like, I know personally for me, it was like one of the most liberating experiences that's happened to me in 10 years.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible how we can take that feeling in the moment and it just carries through the rest of the day and the rest of our lives. That one moment of power just really sets the tone for your day. Like, even right now, just hearing Mackenzie talking about it, I have this big grin on my face because that feeling is resonating with me right now.
And as men, when we hear women say liberating, I don't know if we always know what women mean by that something is liberating. So what do you mean by liberating?
I would say imagine an anxiety being lifted from your shoulders. So this is a really maybe possibly oversimplified example, but if you get a bill in the mail and you can't pay it right away, it kind of impacts your thoughts for the rest of your day or for the rest of your week until you're able to pay that bill. And then as soon as you pay that bill, you're like, oh, it's done. Like, I'm free now. And so that's something that I like to compare it to, is just that sense of like, wow, this burden, this anxiety that I've been carrying every single day, all the time, is starting to be lifted, is starting to lighten somewhat. And I feel like I can actually be my own true self because that anxiety is lifting.
Yeah, I like to think about, sometimes if you're like, you lay down at the end of the day and then you're laying there for a while, and all of a sudden, like, your shoulders or your legs or something relax, and you didn't even realize that they were set on tension for like your whole day. Yeah, it's just like sometimes a background program that's running all the time. It's like one of those tabs that's left open running all the time, where as women in particular, I think we're conscious of the levels of violence that happen around us, and having that sense of true, just raw physical power is something that really gives you access to like freedom from that feeling, even if it's just for in that training. It carries with you for the rest of the day that your shoulders relaxed for that one moment. Yeah, I think that really makes an impact on the. It certainly makes an impact on me, and I think that makes an impact on our participants.
So then inversely for me and other men to understand is, as women, you all are feeling duress all the time. And liberation is that lifting of that duress, even if it's temporary.
Yeah, that's a good way of reflecting that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I know that in conversations that I've had with men, it's really difficult for them as an individual who may think that they project safety a lot to the women around them. It's really difficult for them to wrap their head around the fact that on a certain level, women don't feel safe walking around in their everyday lives. It's like a really difficult thing for them to wrap their head around. And I think that goes back to, what Beck was saying about just listening and believing women when they're talking about it, and sort of just being, just ruminating on what that would feel like for you if that was your experience. Or maybe you've had an experience where you felt like that.
And then it's up to us then to connect that and try to empathize.
Yeah.
Now, I've been seeing a slow but growing trend of nonprofit self-defense programs popping up. Do you have any advice for others out there who are thinking about starting their own nonprofit self-defense program, or who just want to start an informal free self-defense program? And I know you two mentioned earlier the paperwork is probably the easiest part of it. So what bit of advice do you all have?
The advice I would offer is you don't need to reinvent the wheel. This self-defense community is a large and growing community, and there are plenty of resources out there for people who want to start something, and people who are willing to help, whether that's in providing curriculum or reaching out to your local martial arts community about creating spaces or receiving training. Just that it can be done, and you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Beck says that's a really important point. I think people think that they have to be the ultimate expert before they are the one that shows up to make space for this conversation in their community. I think that that's a really common misconception. And I know, even at the beginning of Warrior Sisters, most of the founders were not, quote unquote, experts in anything. They were just the ones that were willing to show up and hold space for it, and to ask for those resources and make them available to the broader community. And I think that's the most important thing, just showing up, and showing up consistently, and holding that space for your community.
That's in line with the history of movements, right? Is that usually in movements, the founders are never experts. They're just the ones who decided we need to do something and then consistently did that.
Yep. Consistency. That's a really big part.
What's been the most rewarding thing about being a part of Warrior Sisters?
Oh my gosh.
That's such a big question.
What's the most? Oh man.
For me, the most rewarding thing has been the community that I have gained through this organization and through this work. I think a lot of times, especially in my generation, women were taught to kind of be pitted against themselves, to either be in competition with each other, or to believe in the narrative that women don't know how to communicate with each other. And this was a community that just shot down all of that socialization. And I've made incredible friendships out of this that are supportive and are built off of believing in each other and facing our challenges together, and becoming stronger for it. And it's something that I feel really, really passionately about, and something that I'm very, very glad to have in my life.
Yeah, I would say Yes, also that times 1,000. I've got I've gotten I've grown into such an amazing community through Warrior Sisters. I've met so many really powerful, amazing women who are so multifaceted, and passionate about so many different things, that forming that community, I maybe more so, and especially around the, that central hub being self-defense, around that being like, kind of this circle of women that are all sort of training to defend themselves and defend other women. It's just like a very powerful space to come and just bask in. And and on that same note, like being able to then like come as a participant and then turn around and now be working as part of the trainers collective and slowly be gaining skills to go out and teach this, so that I know not only do I get to see like faces every single week as they light up when they like are first or ongoing, or every single week they show up and they are getting to practice these skills, but that I know that I'm furthering my skills, so that if whenever it should happen that I move away from here, I could be the one who showed up in that new community and possibly move into offering trainings myself.
So there's a synergy that comes from it then, that everybody who participates gets to actually participate in that synergy.
Exactly.
Oh my God. Yes. We do what we call like an intensity drill. I don't have much experience with martial arts, so maybe you do this as well, but we will do like stations where people do just whatever they can do really fast about the skills that we just practiced that day, and like the intensity that builds up in the entire room while we're doing those is just like, we'll leave you with a high for several days, right? Like these women, they're smiling and everyone is cheering and they're like, yes, you hit that so great, hit it harder, and we're just like, they're moving from station to station, so they get to see every single other person in the group while they are practicing these skills in an intense environment, like in an environment that's building up a lot of energy but feels really safe and empowered in like this glowing container. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah, I second that. That's also one of my favorite things as well. It's the whooping and the cheering of women just supporting somebody as they are going all out on a pad is something that I just cannot get over how wonderful that feels. It's like having a stadium of fans cheering you on.
So for listeners or people who are considering doing their first self-defense program, they should also know then that this can be fun.
Definitely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So fun.
Yeah. That's the thing that was surprising to me when I started doing these trainings before I became a trainer. Was I was really nervous. When you hear self-defense, you hear all the anxieties that come with that term because it's so loaded. And I wasn't prepared for the amount of positivity that this was going to bring into my life. So when you hear self-defense, I would advise people to think that there's opportunity for positivity and power that comes out of that training. It's not just the loaded term.
This has been awesome, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners have learned a lot. So if people want to find out more about Warrior Sisters, or have Warrior Sisters come to their town, or even donate some money, where can they get more information?
So they can visit our website, which is warrior-sisters.org. And there they'll be able to reach out and contact us to discover where we're offering trainings. We have regular trainings happening in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we're about to reinitiate our trainings in Eugene, Oregon as well come January. And then again, they can email us, which they'll find that contact information through our website. Although our email is, I'll just say it, is training@warrior-sisters.org. And they can request private trainings or just resources from us as well through there.
They can also find us on Facebook.
Y'all also have a really great Instagram, and I've enjoyed that for years.
We do have a great Instagram as well.
Yeah, our Instagram, you'll be able to find photos that are from our trainings as they're taking place. So it's a great place to keep up as well.
Well, thanks, you two.
Thank you so much.
It was wonderful.
Now that's a show. We've grown Southpaw purely from word of mouth, so that means it's all organic. So if you're already spreading the word, please continue to do so. If you've never done it, please consider telling your friends, sharing on social media, and also leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. This will make it easier for others to find us. And since this is independent media, every dollar you pledge on Patreon goes a long way in the production of the show. Find us on patreon.com/southpawpod.